Thank you, Rhonda, for being with me today. I've taught. Obviously, you might have picked up some of the other folks that I have taught classes for NAMI before on story writing, and a couple of the greatest authors and and creatives are in the room today. So I'm so thrilled to have all of you. Now, let me begin by saying that this is so to welcome you to Connecting Our Voices, Healing Your Soul Through Stories, or just about any title. My signature class that I teach for Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning and Good Foods Co-op here in town, Lexington, is Writing the Stories of Your Life. So I'm a lawyer by day, and increasingly, though, a story, I don't know what I want to call myself, story coach, story doula, whatever you might want to call me, to encourage people to write their stories. Typically, my classes are very interactive, and so I can't imagine you're going to want to just listen to me for 35 minutes. So give me lots of comments, and I know some of you are very vocal and would be pleased to do that, so please. And so, Rhonda, when it says I have 7 things in the chat right now, does that mean for me? Or is that?
No, ma'am. I am watching your chat. It was a question about the other sessions and what times they started.
Gotcha. Okay, so what the theme of this event is, of course, gazing into the future of mental health. 3 objectives. Now, I want to say, too, that this is aimed at a general big audience. And what I mean by that is when I'm teaching my classes, I have caregivers in the classes. I have people who have serious mental illnesses, who are recovering in various ways. And I probably have a smattering of people that are just seeking, particularly caregivers, a sense of mental wellness. But the 3 objectives that I listed here was to inspire you to begin to think about writing your story of healing. And I'll get to that in a minute and exactly what I mean, how to focus so that you know kind of a guideline on what to write. Or I know that now people will do like something with notes on their phones or whatever, but I want to encourage you to actually write, because what that does is it slows you down enough that you can think. And so that's why journal writing is so important. And finally, to achieve peace with your story. Maybe it's more appropriate for your story to be, for you to own it, to know it happened. You can't erase it, whatever your story is, but you can learn to live with it, or you can put it in its appropriate place, start a new story. And so that's what we're doing here today. Now, you might want to put in the chat, I would love to hear. I know Walter is a poet, and an incredible poet, and he's with us today, although it looks like he might have disappeared. Don't know where Walter is. But I have a poet here. Kaylin, you go by several different, and you might want to put in the chat how people can find you, an incredible entertainer and creative. And she's been in my classes, and she does a number of things in writing as well. So put that in the chat if you will. I'd love to know more about you. And the way I typically start my classes is, and I typically do 2 or 3 in a series so that we have opportunities to write. We don't have that opportunity here today. So just take this as sort of an introduction, right, into writing the stories that are healing you. And I usually would like to get to know you because I form a community. There's trust that develops among the people in my classes, and then we share. So that's going to be a very different format today. But I want to talk about some of the themes that I find very interesting about gazing into the future of mental health. One, something we all know is that there is a mental health crisis, right? We've always had that, folks. It's worse today. But let me tell you a story of my brother, who is a diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic at age 74. He's a custodian. He has to have work where he knows exactly what he has to do each day. And after being bullied in several jobs, he finally found one that was suitable for him. But my parents would never talk about my brother's mental illness. And I don't know if you've had that experience. That's in my lifetime that people just didn't talk about it. The only time my mother, even though my brother was hospitalized several times, my mother would only say things like, Keith, my brother, had the mental illness because my father drank beer. I mean, that's kind of the myths that grew up around mental illness. So what I think has happened, though, as people, and this is kind of, if you might want to say it's a good thing, the craziness of our universe is that we are more aware of things that are going on all around us. And thus, with the overload of information, some of it good, some of it misinformation, the lack of trust, social media, and then bang, the pandemic hit, which made the problems even worse. But we also have a greater awareness. So you have this tension going on. My brother would have a better outcome today if my parents had been able to talk about it. Even when he was hospitalized, they kept it secret. Now, I don't think I'm alone in that. I think that was a phenomenon. So, and I believe too, another theme of my work is that I think we are all on a continuum of ailments, from extreme trauma that I find almost unimaginable that some of the people in my classes have written about, that induces mental illness, to just existing in a world that humans weren't designed for. The assault on our psyche is daily, and it's that information overload. A lot of people think we just know too much, that bad things happened before, we just know too much. And I say the 24-hour news, I've taken to just reading the headlines. I can't handle it anymore. It keeps me awake at night. And so I think we're all in the same boat of trying to achieve mental wellness, is what I call it. We also know that there are likely not enough educated professionals to help everybody out there in need. I'm not a therapist, so I don't say my work substitutes for therapy. If you need therapy, and hopefully you have someone who help you, they say anybody can benefit from it, and I believe that is true, but I don't know that there are enough people out there to meet that need and serve that population. So I don't see anything in my chat yet, right, Rhonda? Because I wanted to know who I was talking to here today. What we
Nothing yet, but you have plenty of time.
Yeah, I have plenty of time. Remember, tell me what you're doing. Tell me if you're writing right now. I would love to know that. So what we're seeing, I think, is a movement toward what I call more accessible mental wellness tools, if you want to call them, from people who are suffering from true mental illness all the way to those who are just seeking someone like me. I'm on that continuum somewhere, and I'm seeking peace in my life. And those things include meditation, yoga, and in my case, stories, and using your stories to grow and heal. Other professions, as I mentioned earlier in my chat with my friend Matthew, is that it's going on in all the professions because of the greater awareness everybody has of their needs. I'm in the legal profession, and one of my jobs is to actually train non-lawyers to handle some of the initial needs that people are having as they become more aware of needing to address those needs. Doctors, you have paraprofessionals, nurses are taking on greater roles, nurse practitioners, all of those things. So I think that that's a phenomenon that the helping professions, the assisting professions, the accessible ones can truly help with. So now stories. Stories have been with us since the beginning of time in hieroglyphics on cave walls. Those who tell stories rule the world, said the Hopi Native Americans. Okay, let's see. I have a chat thing. I'll get to that in a minute. I don't want to be too interruptive, but I don't want to just talk by myself.
We'll save the questions till the end and then let you address them all.
Oh, that's probably a great idea. Thank you, Rhonda. It's just I'm not used to just doing the talking. So anyway, all right, good. I don't know if you remember maybe your favorite children's book. Everybody hopefully had an opportunity to read a book as a child or have it read to them, and they have a favorite. I've got a favorite, and it's called Alan and His Big Scary Teeth, and it's out in a movie right now, and I want to see that because I have grandchildren. But he's about a bully, an alligator who was a bully, and he would go and roar and scare all the other animals in the forest. And at night, he'd take out his teeth because they were false teeth, and one of the forest animals saw him, and he thus was revealed as being a bully. So our children's stories, all the stories we have in our lives build up to wisdom. And I'd love for you to put in the chat the stories of your childhood, maybe a children's book that really stood out for you, that you maybe experienced along the way. So again, there's this movement to share and tell our stories about our wounds, our setbacks. And We cherish the good stories, and we cherish the ones that are setbacks from all our stories that are good and bad. And I think all of them are healing stories. I want you to take a moment just to close your eyes and think about from morning to night how many stories you encounter. I know Walter encounters things that spark his poetry every day. And I just would love for you just to take a moment of quiet time and think about those stories. If you want to share them, that's fine. Or maybe it's a go-to story, something that you always write about. And in my classes with NAMI, I have people who write about the trauma that they experienced. And they write that over and over and in different ways, be it poetry, be it fiction, be it memoirs, being whatever it is. And so I was going to share with you a couple of things. One is a book, and I'll write this in the chat at the end, but kind of the Bible of this work is Writing as a Way of Healing, How Telling Our Stories Transforms Our Lives. I don't know. Does that come across, Rhonda, as not bad?
Yes, ma'am, we can see it.
Okay, and it's by Louise DeSalvo, and she really wrote the book. And there's a couple of really good articles that I don't have a citation for, but can make it available. I even wrote a book about a trauma that I experienced that was not as unimaginable as some that I've heard, but it was a trauma to me. And it was about the loss of a job that I loved for 30 years. And I lost it during the recession, and I went into deep, deep depression because it was my identity, which probably wasn't a really good idea, but it was. And I had to dig my way out of that. And I think the low point was crying on my mother's grave, my doctor worrying about my very safety. But this is called Dodging Coconuts, How to Survive the Storm and Rebuild Your Life. And I wrote this in 2016. And it was such a cathartic experience that I've never even really marketed the book. What it was intended to do was to help me live through this traumatic experience. So what is expressive writing? That's what DeSalvo talks about as being what we need to do in order to meet the needs of healing our souls. Put in the chat what you think expressive writing is to you. And if you're a writer, then write down what it is that you're experiencing. Let me tell you what she says it is. It's that which helps us make sense of our thoughts and emotions. Through expressive writing, we retain ownership of our stories. They happened, there's nothing changing them, and we must live with them and put them either in a compartment or live with them and glean out the lessons and the wisdom and move on from that, put it in its appropriate place. I often think of my father, and I don't know who you might see as an inspiration person. My father is kind of my go-to stories when I tell stories, and I write for a number of venues. It was always amazing to me one day when I overheard him giving advice to my son who had just graduated from college. And he was telling him, my son was suffering from the first angst of some loss of an internship or something that had happened in his life. And my father said, suddenly in exasperation, he said, "David, things just never work out." And I was so taken aback by that because my father was a happy man. He was a very settled man. He was very happy. And what I finally concluded is that he was ultimately an optimist. His life never really worked out. He had to change his story over and over. He wanted to stay in Kentucky and farm. He was born poor, lost his father early on, had to drop out of school, and had to go to Ohio and work in a factory that cost him his hearing with the rat-a-tat-tat of the machinery. But he was happy because each time life dealt him a setback, he didn't necessarily write it, but he told me the stories. And he was able then to pivot and create a new story. And I think that's what he ultimately meant when he told David that things never work out. They work out because you create the new story. So here's the blueprint that DeSalvo and other experts and me adding into it, but I want to give them plenty of credit here. And this is good for people who say, and I get this a lot in my classes, not so much in NAMI, I find a lot of writers, but I teach a lot of people and they like, They take the class because they're very interested, but they say, I don't know what to write. I have no idea how to write. I've never done it before and I'm not good at it. That's the accessible part. This is something everyone can do because you don't even necessarily have to share it. What I tell people is to do the dump into their journal. All it takes is going to Kroger's or grocery store and buying one of those little journals and beginning and just beginning, sitting down, setting a timer, maybe 15 minutes, where you just pour out your story. And if you can't get beyond a certain point, write that. Say, I can't get beyond this. I don't know what else to say. Write it over and over and over again until your story comes to you, until it starts to bubble up and you begin to write, and make yourself do it. It's a discipline. And it's a discipline worth adopting. I know a lot of people also tell me I don't have time. I think we all have time for mental wellness. I just suffered a bout of sciatica because I wasn't exercising like I should. You've got to do that. It's like exercising your mind and how important it is. So you begin with that plain, ordinary journal. In one of the classes that I've had, one of my students, I was really proud of her because she followed this prompt and she wrote a lot about as being a caregiver of several family members with mental illness, but she couldn't write about her brother. That was the one that stumped her. So she sent me her draft and she said, I can't get beyond this. She said, I don't know what to say because I'm so angry at him. She thought he had been in recovery, found out he had had backslid in his alcoholism. And she said, I'm just so angry. I can't sleep at night. I'm so angry at him for hurting our mother. Mother died shortly after he did fall backwards. And I made her write. I told her to write and write and write. And what finally emerged, because she was doing this, was that she realized the wisdom of being able to love her brother and be angry at him at the same time, but to be able to reconcile that. And it gave her some peace because it was really troubling for her. And remember to be very detailed. A lot of people want to write in kind of high 30,000 foot, but I think the detail, connecting those feelings and events, is what is critical here. I remember, and I've taught hundreds of students, but I remember one student, I can't remember her name, and if she's on here and I just don't see her, just a gifted writer, has written several fiction pieces, has been published. And yet, out of the hundreds of people I've taught, I remember her description of a red flamboyant dress and high heels on the night she decided to go sober. And she didn't know where her children were, nothing. But she wrote very vividly about that experience because it was her epiphany. It was her moment. And that, I thought, was just a beautiful breakthrough. And she is a writer of many, many ways. So detail. And then I think it's also important that we realize that, and this is a quote out of the article that I can send a link to, humans are meaning-making machines, aren't we? You try to make meaning out of everything that you encounter on a daily basis because it's your life. And particularly at stages of life and growth and all of it, meaning-making machines. I love that. Finding the revelation, like my student did about her brother, that she didn't have to hate her brother, that he did some things that displeased her, but she was struggling because she wanted to love her brother as well. And she learned how to do that through writing his story and writing the story. So giving meaning is a very natural thing. That's wisdom. Our stories are how we gain wisdom. And there's several other benefits. There's said to be that it actually frees up brain space, that trauma actually changes your brain structure, but that by writing your story and by putting it down on a piece of paper, or if you have to in a recording, but some way taking it from here and putting it down actually does something pretty magical, and it frees up brain space. And some say, and there's a lot of studies underway, what are they saying, that actually proof that people are less depressed, less self-reporting, but going to clinics a lot less, needing a lot of less intensive therapy maybe they still need therapy, but maybe less intense, if they write their stories and understand their stories. And embracing your vulnerabilities is something that's being talked about a lot today. You see it with Simone Biles, the gymnast, Simone, the gymnast who withdrew from her competition because she needed mental space, and told us her story and was very open. Like I said, my brother's situation was very different. He couldn't tell his story. Trying to watch time and stay on time. So embracing your vulnerabilities, Brene Brown and others are talking about, it's very cleansing for you and for others. And it allows you to express your thoughts and perhaps share, perhaps not. I'll deal with that in a moment. And the science, like I said, says less depression. Or depression, the scientists here probably know this better than I, but I've read depression has increased threefold since 2018. And a lot of that was the pandemic, certainly. And that's another topic. You may see a lot of people who experience trauma, like the pandemic, or the floods recently in Eastern Kentucky, or the tornadoes in Western Kentucky, or even hearkening back to the Holocaust and the writing that came out of that. What was it? There was a famous piece, I've got it somewhere, that was written in 9 days about the Holocaust, and it became a worldwide bestseller because it was so intense and so important, and people read it. Of course, we're all familiar with Anne Frank and her works. But development of resilience, and there's many studies underway for the workplace, and the development of empathy and dealing with people who are on the edge, because so many people are today, and unleashing creativity. Again, I think it has to do with giving the brain some space to become more creative. You know, as well as I know, if you're under a great deal of stress and you can't deal with issues, your creativity goes out the window. And finally, I think hope. It gives you hope. If you can write it down, I think it's important that it gives you hope. And I'm going to add one other thing that I think is so important, and that is sharing. Like I said, we don't have time here to do this, but in my classes, I always start out by forming a community. We're so bereft of community today. We don't reach out. What's the famous book, Bowling Alone? We now bowl more often, but alone. Can you imagine? My brother's very alone. And how stories and sharing those stories, I'm encouraging him to go to the Senior Citizen Center because he's not very social. But when we form our community in the classes that I've taught, people develop trust. And I prefer like 3 classes in a row or even more. But the first one, we get to know one another. We share. We say, we get that wonderful feeling of, at least for a short time. And I've done all of them in NAMI in virtual, which is not my preferred thing, but it's what we've had to do. And I love having people share. And by the second class, I send out a prompt, or I tell people, write your story. Most of them have already been writing, and they have been writing their stories, and they probably self-select to go to the class, and then they share. Walter has shared many of his poems with us, which are amazing, and he continues to send them to me. I don't force that. If people don't want to share, this is also a way to be very private about your issues and what you're dealing with. And it's just simple. You get to know one another. Albeit a small group, you develop that sense of trust with even a small group. Maybe you can't trust the world, maybe you can't trust politicians, but you can trust the 4 or 5 people. And then some of my other classes, I have up to 15, which is not my preferred number, but that sometimes happens. Because we're all seeking that, aren't we? We're all seeking comfort in community. So that's all I have as far as a formal presentation. And it's about 11:30. So can we look now at the chat, Rhonda? Is that?
Yes, ma'am. And you're actually scheduled till noon. I'm not sure if they told you that. So you have plenty of time to take questions.
So if I questions or answers, let's see here.
We have a comment from Mary Autry when you were talking about the family stigma. She said that her family acts like mental illness is better off not spoken about, lots of keeping secrets, and almost like mental illness is contagious if you get too close to a person with mental illness. I'm so sorry.
Yes, and that was the point. Very good point. Is in and who is that again? Who wrote that?
Mary Autry.
All right, I need
Or
to.
Otter. Sorry.
Okay, Ms. Otter. That is a great point, and I think that is one of the good things that's come out of raising awareness and of people being more willing to talk about vulnerabilities. It's books are being written about it. Brene Brown is one of the most famous, who very openly shared her year of counseling because she was having a mental breakdown. It must have been horrible not to be able to talk about it. And I know it was for my brother, and I know his outcome could have been a lot better if he had been able to. So I love that point. Thank you so much. Let's see here.
The next one is Angela Short, and she was commenting on one of her favorite books about mental illness. It's called I Will Love You Forever.
Okay.
And the next one is Diane Schaefer, MD. And she says, I always liked the story of Noah in the ark, and I wondered as a child if my family would have been chosen as the family that survived.
Yeah, my father always thought we would. And he lived to be 95. And he lived through the Eastern Kentucky storms and floods, and he often said that too. He said, oh, I wonder, I'm pretty sure we're going to survive because we're like Noah, and we really behave well, and we think well of everybody. And even he lived to be 95, and in 95 we had a big flood, and it was his big story.
Yeah, it sounds like my father's born in Eastern Kentucky and sort of learned to live with the setbacks and thrived because what he saw was the cup half full kind of thing. He was able to process it and see the cup as half full. And
he lived on a farm, and then went to Detroit and worked in the car factories, and he says, well, you're going to be a doctor, you'll take care of me, and we'll be like Noah. He said that his whole life.
I love that.
He was healthy until 94. I mean, never in the hospital, never injured.
Yeah, my dad lived to 93. And so,
but
you're a doctor?
I was optimistic. Yes, I'm a physician.
Okay,
yes.
tell me what kind of doctor, I guess is what I'm trying to get to.
I'm an orthopedic surgeon. In 1972, there were only 25 women orthopedic surgeons in the entire country. So I've had my adversity, but thanks to my father and Noah, I knew I could get through it. It wasn't easy being the first orthopedic surgeon, no matter where I was, including Eastern Kentucky. I was the first female orthopedic surgeon in Kentucky. And
have you written about that? That's an amazing story. Are you a writer?
No, I'm not.
So let's see, somebody here says journaling is a great coping skill. And maybe you should write about your father, maybe because it sounds like he played a major role in your development and in your stories.
Yeah, I should. Right.
Okay. All right. That would be great. Who wrote journaling as a great coping skill?
That was me in response to Dr. Matthew Pirzala, who said, I often recommend therapeutic journaling to patients. It's particularly helpful in preventing polypharmacy, recording a response to a new medication / dose titration, along with status of interpersonal relationships, diet, exercise, sleep habit, etc.
And is that Matthew?
Yes.
Okay, Matthew, can you expound on that? Do you do that with your patients? Tell us about your work.
Oh, I certainly try. I certainly do try.
And then what do you
But
find?
yeah, I mean, unfortunately, sometimes you develop, well, particularly in the case setting of people with mental illness, they're not always developing a close relationship with a singular physician, counselor, what have you, and they start getting their medical advice, their medical care from lots of different places. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And you know, it's kind of the paradigm being that patient shows up with a complaint, doctor, physician listens for a while, and then, you know, they write a prescription for a pill. Okay. And sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it's not. But what tends to accumulate is the medication list of what a patient has been on in the past.
Mhm.
And it does seem, after being in practice since 2006, more than a couple of years, that medical practitioners are generally more willing to add one of their own favorite medications than to take away something that somebody else that might know something more than me about this situation added a while back. And it takes a bit of probing to ask, how are you doing on that? Maybe that's not what we need. Maybe you want to reflect on the continuation of it. And it takes a little bit of a higher functioning patient, but one that is in tune, with what's going on with them, to self-identify, what the response was to a particular agent, and to decide if that's the right thing for them.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon that we see a patient coming in that's been off all their meds, and they come in with a list of meds they should be on and relate, get me back on all my meds. And
Wow.
it's
How about,
very helpful when somebody can, as you mentioned earlier, organize their thoughts, okay,
yeah.
organize their response to an outside agent, and then identify if, if this is something that's helpful, or if it's detracting.
Do you engage in what you call, I think in your comment, therapeutic writing?
I encourage it. I encourage it very much. Yeah.
And what have you found? Do you find in sort of anecdotal kind of way that that
Well,
expressive writing works?
I find, not in a formal sense, I don't ask anyone to bring a journal in or anything like that, but
Right.
I find that, the patients that do take up some form of, self-assessment, self-reflection, introspection, what have you, generally start taking fewer medications. Okay. It's the patients that are coming in from a severe environment where things are very disorganized and they've been off their meds. Okay. That presenting for the first time in maybe weeks or months to a new practitioner and getting back on all their meds is, it's a good place to start, I suppose. But generally speaking, those who can organize their thoughts well, or they can self-identify when their thoughts are particularly disorganized in this particular day.
What would you add to what I said today? Is there anything you would add as a doctor? Are you a counselor? Are you a therapist? Or are you
My background is in internal medicine, and
Okay.
then a subspecialty in addictionology. Okay.
Okay.
And so I get,
What would you add? What
well,
could help people? What could help some of the people that are here?
I would just say that, you're going to have good days and bad days, and maybe a bad day is because you didn't get good sleep last night. Maybe we need to
Maybe.
enhance those habits. I think it's worth a little daub in a personal journal of, slept bad last night, feel bad today,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then, is this something that we need to
And
really
maybe what you're
toward?
saying too is there's a tendency to, how shall I say this? Clinicalize everything and medicate everything. Whereas maybe what people need to understand in expressive writing is that that's what maybe once you do that kind of dump of what's going on and you keep a regular journal, maybe what I'm hearing you say is you you talk to the journal. and you say maybe you had a bad night's sleep, but it doesn't amount to full-blown mental illness. I mean, you look at the pharmaceutical ads on television, and people just think there's a cure for everything, every ailment, and that is an issue with the greater awareness, which can be good, and it can be. I was thinking, every month is named something, Alzheimer's month or walks for all this stuff. So, I don't even read the symptoms anymore because I figure I can talk myself into
You
having
could probably have that if you wanted.
anything,
Right?
And if I write and I will keep my stories on paper, what I find is that I can keep them up more under control and understand myself and others better. It's hard to articulate, but I think that's true. Anybody else want to make a comment about that? I have a gentleman down and that must be Sergio. That must be him. Okay. Janice, who? Janice is there. Maybe. Claire. Kaylin. Well, Walter.
No, I'm here. What's up?
Well, tell us about your work. When I talked about writing stories, I know that you write. I know you have your TikTok. Talk about what writing does for you. Did anything I say resonate?
Well, here's the thing. The reason why I write is because a lot of times I'm not heard, but it is what it is. Since I've moved to Kentucky, a lot of people see me as a threat because I am from up north. We are known for speaking our minds, speaking our truth. We tend to be very vocal about we can be very vulgar, and we just don't hold back. Whereas in Kentucky, a lot of people do not take kindly to that. They don't like they like the way I would put it, they like the truth sugar coated so it don't feel bad when they receive it. But just putting it out there bluntly, it's a major problem. I have been denied opportunities to speak because the higher ups where I work at NAMI Lexington just didn't feel like I was capable of verbally restraining myself. And quite frankly, I did not care because at the end of the day, to me, when you write or when you talk, it is more important to speak your truth than to sit there and worry about somebody's feelings. It's an art of expression. That's why they call it an art of expression for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
But people fail to realize that everybody's experiences in life are different. To give you an example, I've watched somebody die right in front of my face at the age of 5 years old. And we were just coming out of church. My dad was rewarding us for behaving in church by going to the bodega to get some candy. And I watched this man get violently shot in the head because he did not want to give the robber money. To me, that was just senseless. But that's how life is.
Yeah. So when you write about those experiences because it relieves the frustration of not being heard. Does the writing help with that in your creative activities?
Well, it does, but see, here's the thing, Miss Lovely, or Dr. Lovely, Dr. Lovely, I'm so sorry. But here's the thing, I write because if I don't write it down, I'll just hold it in and explode. I have a history of violence. I have intermittent explosive disorder. I have bipolar disorder. And when people hear that, they perceive you as a threat, not as a person who's been through a whole mess full of trauma. I've watched people die. I've had family members die due to medical neglect. I've been through some stuff. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. I've been discriminated against.
Yeah. So you put it down, and that helps you to process it, right? And to develop your stories and your creativity. Do you think you're writing
it just helps me get it off my chest, because if not, I would walk around just in a hateful state. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure.
Like I would not care about others. I would just become emotionalist due to the fact that people have rejected me so much. It gets you to a point where you don't care about anything or anybody.
That's
You
right.
see what
So
I'm saying?
now you learn how to how shall we say this, to create, to manage it so that you can get through your life. And that's the way you manage it, is through your
Well, yeah, I
knowledge.
manage it because I have no choice but to manage
That's right.
it. And let
Absolutely.
me tell you why I say that. Because now in this climate that we live in, I hate to say it, we really are back in the 1960s. You do see
Mhm.
a lot of racial tension. You see a lot of hostility and anger in the media. We are losing our rights. We are dealing with some situations we wouldn't be dealing with 10 and 20 years ago. You know what I'm saying? I'm frustrated
Yeah.
at the fact that my walk of life presents a threat to some others,
Yeah.
whereas I want my walk of life to, you know what I'm saying, help
Yeah.
somebody who has the same anger issues that I do. You see what I'm saying?
I
Like,
agree. Okay. Why don't, let's see. Walter, I know you write prolifically, your poetry. Is Walter still there? No. Okay. I don't know where he may have gone.
Yeah,
Bryson has a podcast.
I'm here.
Yeah, Walter, tell us about your writing. I love how you got started writing, and how does it help you cope with some of the things you encounter?
When I get annoyed or to keep from being, there's annoyed, irritated, and anger, and when I get annoyed, I put it on paper. My annoyance on paper. It's like all my poems are like grievances, and when you write a grievance, it gets it out of your system.
That's right. And they're amazing. And you're what do you call yourself?
I call myself Walter.
I know, but you have, when you write your poetry, isn't it like the, the hillbilly poet, or haven't you done that in some of your poetry? It's amazing
I
stuff.
don't remember. I don't remember.
Okay.
My
Okay.
wife said I did. See, they titled my poems "The Hillbilly Poet." For
Yeah.
many
And-
years, I wrote a series of poems called "The Hillbilly Poet." It's published every year in the Journal of Kentucky Studies. And when it didn't get published anymore, I changed it to "The Redneck Nerd," about my grandson. And
Yes. No,
for
you sent me that one.
several years, I got published poems called "The Redneck Nerd."
Yeah, I know you do amazing stuff. I mean, I hope to get you more exposure, because you tell us how you started writing. Where were you?
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay. That's okay. Well,
You-
thank you.
You can tell
Thank
me.
you for,
You tell me if you remember what I told you, because I don't keep my stories straight.
well, you told me once I could tell anything about you, so I'm going to. And you said you started writing at Eastern State,
I
right?
was in the writing class at Eastern State. I was in the writing class at the Metro Detention Center. I can't remember which came first.
Yeah, I know. And it's amazing stuff. I wish these folks could see some of your poetry. I'm going to try to make sure that happens. Rhonda, no, that's not Rhonda. That's Dr. Schaefer.
Yeah, I have several patients on Suboxone, and initially the Suboxone program required journaling, and they provided the
They
journals.
acquired it?
And
Really?
at first, but at first my patients were a little reluctant, but there's a few, but they started writing and sharing in the waiting room, and
Oh,
not
oh,
yeah, and it really prompted enormous creativity. And a lot of coal miners quit school in the 8th grade to
right.
supplement the family income, and so the syntax is a little rough, and the spelling is a little rough, but it's very, 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 very good. And they share what they share with each other, and I
That's so
really,
important. Yeah.
yeah,
And they form sort of a bond by sharing with one
yeah,
another.
Right.
And I think I love that story. It reminds me of a very famous experiment in California where a teacher formed a writing group out of some very difficult students who had experienced unfathomable trauma. And that became known, and they have actual annual reunions of these students who began to write their stories and how impactful their stories were. And they were able to, I think, lead to much more successful outcomes in their lives. So I think that is wonderful. But writing is still part of the treatment, or did it go away?
Oh, no, it still is at first, my Suboxone patients were patients who were injured, were on medication, and then
Yeah.
the family decided they needed to get off. So they weren't addicts. They
Okay.
weren't. They were just people accustomed to pain medication. So almost all of them succeeded, and
Mhm.
that's not the case with most Suboxone clinics. In most
Really?
Suboxone clinics that are not trauma related, they're on it like forever. It's like methadone. They're on it forever, and
Yeah.
but successfully on it forever, as they are
Okay.
Can I say
with methadone.
something?
But not at
Yeah.
my. I had a
Uh,
specific type of patient.
Yeah.
Patients who were injured who eventually got off their medication, and Suboxone helped them.
Oh,
well,
great.
can I say something about
Sure.
that?
Sure.
Uh, I have a couple of friends who were on Suboxone, and they hate going to the doctor. They hate going to the psychiatrist because they feel like with them being on Suboxone, there's a certain stigma against them because when they come into the ER because they hurt themselves or they're in pain, they feel like there is a stigma or a judgment against them because doctors that don't know them automatically assume that they're drug addicts or really bad people. I've watched it happen to my friend time and time again. And it's just to the point, it's just hindered her process in recovery because
Really?
she feels like nobody believes her.
Oh, interesting.
May I comment?
Yes.
I have a neighbor that's on Suboxone, and she used to drink on Suboxone, and she flattened the tires on her own car because her husband wouldn't let her go anywhere, give her the keys. Another time she broke the windows out of her car because he wouldn't give her keys when she was drinking. And the other day, a short time ago, her dog got run over, and she was at the end of my driveway. The neighbor probably ran over. Another neighbor probably ran over it intentionally because it was down to his house and in his driveway where it got run over. And she cried like a baby and said the reason she liked animals was she couldn't get along with people.
Yeah.
And what happens is there's a lot of untreated hurt that's not dealt with. People who have medication, they want to medicate away the hurts that's in the psyche to bring them out, deal with them, and regress and titrate the pain that way as well as the medication.
Yeah. So Walter, can writing heal people then, in your opinion? If they, is that one way that it can be done? Just one? I mean, maybe in conjunction with therapy. What do you think about?
Yeah,
One
part
thing?
of what.
I took her to the Suboxone clinic one time, and they told me that she had to have therapy. They didn't have a public restroom. I walked next door to the McDonald's to use the restroom. Between the time I left to go to the restroom and back, they had her in and did therapy with her. They do El Quico therapy in Eastern Kentucky. Suboxone clinics is just a money meal for a lot of clinics.
Hmm. Okay. Well, it's like everything else. I'm sure there's good and there's bad, right?
There's
And it's
good,
an
there's good.
evolving industry. This whole addiction, uh, mental illness is an evolving thing, don't you think? I mean, I don't know that we
It,
have everything totally pinned down on what is mental illness and what is, as Dr. Matthew said, and I'm not sure I can pronounce your last name, so I'm not going to try. Pierzella. Anyway, Matthew, hi.
You got it. Here's all. Exactly. Exactly.
But don't you think that the whole idea of what is best methods for treating mental illness is in a state of evolution?
It very much is. Yes. Yes. What's mental illness and what's just neurodiversity is a term that I have an appreciation for, and yeah, it's a tough thing to differentiate. You know, what color is the dress? You know, you saw that internet meme, or not a meme, but that it was a few years ago. Some people see a dress as what, white and gold, and to others it's, I think, green and black. So people experience the world in different ways, and I don't exactly know if my worldview is the appropriate one, but
yeah. And then, you know, we all know that seeing a therapist is good for anybody, but what level of that does everyone need? And maybe there are ways, if that, say, writing, and which is becoming so popular. I mean, the people in my classes in general, not just the NAMI, but they're seeking something. They're seeking something in a world that has very few gifts for anybody these days. It's just all crazy, and we're bombarded, and we know too much, and all of those things. So trying to find ways, be it meditation, Tai Chi, writing your stories, I think there is just, these are all rising up. Now, what's going to end up being, and maybe no one thing will, maybe it's the human condition, right? That you're going to have whatever you call that neurodiversity. It's just, we're all different, just like our bodies are different. 100 years from now, we don't know. They'll find a cure for all the stuff that maybe ails us, but something new will pop up, you know? But I think that mental illness treatment is in a state of flux because it's so prevalent right now. And again, the degree of prevalence we can quibble over, but almost anybody can benefit from their stories and understanding their stories and growing from their stories. And before we end, I wanted to make sure, I can't figure out how I can type in the chat. Maybe I'm just, I wanted to hear from other people, like Mr. Jones. Are you still there? Mr. Jones?
I'm here.
Hey, the comment.
Okay. Mr. Jones, do you have any comment?
No, no, Dr. Lovely. I mean, I think we've talked before. I think I did one of the classes with you before, and I definitely, yes, ma'am. So I think for me, I think that writing definitely helps. And I mean, I do, like right now, me and my friend, I have one person I work with. Her name is Ebony Johnson. She actually is with NAMI Louisville. And what we do is we do a podcast on various topics.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So like we
Tell
do a
us.
lot of things. Now I think writing's really good too, but I'm more of like maybe video, maybe, you know, maybe talking about it, and more, less not writing, but more in the sense of
But it's
like
stories. It's still
talking.
stories, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am. Mhm,
Yeah.
yes, ma'am. Mhm.
What's the name of your podcast? Do you want to put it in the chat?
Oh yeah, Sharing Hope podcast. Yeah, Rhonda
Sharing
put
Hope
it in there. Yeah, but it's also called we call it Mending Mental Mindsets. That's what we call it too. And I can just send my Facebook out. We try to do it every Sunday on Facebook. So I'll put in the chat too, but we try to do it every Sunday. We're gonna do one tomorrow as well. We don't know the topic yet, but we try to do, yes, ma'am.
So you tell stories, or do you interview people that are telling?
So we really, right now, it's just our perspective, just me and her, and we talk about mental health. Like, yes, the one we just did a couple of days was mental health and your faith, kind of talking about people that are Christianity. So Christianity and mental health, because I think sometimes those people do have opinions on your faith versus mental health, and do they really work together? And I always tell people that I believe both of them do. So, well, yeah, it's really. Sorry, what were you going to say, Dr. Lynn?
Well, thank you for doing that, because I think one of the things I love to talk about, but it's hard to talk about it because people get kind of stiff sometimes, is spirituality and faith.
I agree,
It's a
especially when it comes
big
to mental
thing.
health.
It
Yes.
is a big thing. And, it's hard to talk about though, because it's very, it makes you sound like you're trying to convert people or something. I don't know. Where I think, finding when no matter what your view of what spirituality means, it doesn't have to just be religion. It's something inside of you. And what writing does, I think, and telling you in whatever form you do your stories, and whether it's telling it video, and Kaylin does video and all of that stuff, letting those stories out, I think, is a very healthy thing.
I
And,
agree.
and anyway, I think that's just great. I want to make sure y'all knew about this book, Writing as a Way of Healing, How Telling Our Stories Transforms Our Lives by Louise DeSalvo. That's DeSalvo. Anyway, I think we're at the end, right, Rhonda?
Yes, ma'am, you have 1 minute left.
Okay, well, I've enjoyed being with you, and I love this last part. This is what I love, is when we talk to each other. Yeah, I agree with you, Ms. Schaefer. I agree that Dr. Schaefer, many people are religious, and
We do live in the Bible Belt.
we do. Although I do find that sometimes people stiffen a little bit when you start talking about all of those things, but it's all a part of the package of being human, right? Anyway, thank you all. I hope you got something out of this. I certainly appreciated being with you, and I especially loved our chat. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you, Miss Sylvia Lovely. It was lovely.
You're good. Okay, thank you all.